afternoon. It's Friday, the 20th of March. I'm Erin Viner. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. U.S. President Barack Obama has congratulated Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on his victory 2 full days after this week's elections in the wake of a campaign that appeared to further sour relations between the two allies. The National Security Council said in a statement that Obama telephoned Netanyahu last night to convey his best wishes in a conversation the White House said focused on the importance that the U.S. places on the close military, intelligence, and security cooperation that it shares with Israel, reflecting the deep and abiding partnership between the two nations. Both leaders reportedly agreed to continue consultations on a broad range of regional issues, including the difficult path forward to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Many analysts speculated that the delay in the call from the White House to Jerusalem indicates the depth of the strained ties between Obama and Netanyahu, heightened by the Prime Minister's campaign promise disavowing his commitment to a two-state solution with the Palestinians, which he now appears to be in the process of retracting. An emphasis of the Obama administration's disappointment with Netanyahu's pre-election comments about the peace process, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said that Washington is now reevaluating its own path forward on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
As recently as December of last year, the United States House of Representatives, on a voice vote, so essentially without objection, passed the U.S.-Israel Strategic Partnership Act, in which the pursuit of a two-state solution was identified as our goal to resolve this conflict. So it is, as we mentioned yesterday, cause for the United States to evaluate what our path is forward given the Prime Minister's comments. Certainly, as I mentioned yesterday, it merits pointing out that the United States continues to be committed to the kind of military, intelligence, and security cooperation that has characterized the relationship between the United States and Israel for generations at this point.
Meanwhile, during his first post-election interview with NBC Foreign Affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell, the Prime Minister said that he still favors a two-state solution, but that won't be attainable until the Palestinians abandon Hamas, which is committed to Israel's destruction. He also addressed his stance on prospects of a nuclear deal with Iran while downplaying differences between Jerusalem and Washington.
I think there's an unbreakable bond between Israel and the United States. The President has said that. I've said that.
But what about between you and Barack Obama?
Well, I think that is reflected in the relationship between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel.
Turning to the talks between Iran and the six world powers, and senior Russian negotiator Sergei Ryabkov is reporting that the sides are close to reaching a nuclear agreement. He added that while most of their remaining differences are expected to be ironed out by the end of this weekend, another round of negotiations will likely be needed to seal the deal. Unlike Russia, several European nations still have particular concerns at this point of the talks. In indications of a building deal, officials say that the United States and Iran are drafting elements of an agreement from Tehran to make a 40% cut in the number of machines that it has could be used to make atomic bombs in exchange for the partial lifting of crippling international economic sanctions and the United Nations embargo on conventional arms. As the controversial Iranian deal takes shape, U.S. legislators are now stepping up action to increase their ability to influence the emerging agreement. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker and Senior Democratic Senator Robert Menendez agreed to push back a vote on the bill until 2 weeks after this month's deadline for the outline of an accord. The Obama administration is strongly opposing such legislation, which would ensure that any impending deal with Iran is subject to congressional review prior to its final approval. Obama has promised to veto that bill and any others that he sees as attempting to tie the hands of the U.S. negotiators. The White House is striving to convince Democratic senators to hold off voting on the bill until after the reaching of a final agreement with Tehran. This latest congressional announcement seems to present a compromise plan by setting a vote after the target date for a political framework, but ahead of the June deadline for a comprehensive agreement. And meanwhile, U.S. President Obama sent a message to the Iranian people and their leaders on the occasion of the Persian New Year.
This year, we have the best opportunity in decades to pursue a different future between our countries. My message to you the people of Iran, is that together we have to speak up for the future we seek. As I've said many times before, I believe that our countries should be able to resolve this issue peacefully with diplomacy. This is what's at stake today, and this moment may not come again soon. I believe that our nations have a historic opportunity to resolve this issue peacefully, an opportunity we should not miss.
Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives John Boehner offered his own congratulations for the Prime Minister's re-election, while also expressing his support for Netanyahu's powerful skepticism over the transpiring nuclear deal with Iran.
The Prime Minister recognizes the grave threats that we face from radical Islam and from Iran. That's what he talked about in his speech to Congress. This is an opportunity to renew our commitment to confront these threats and, of course, to continue to strengthen the bond between Israel and America.
What impact will Netanyahu's re-election have on the Palestinians as they move forward in the international arena? Well, that's the question IBA's Eli Wogelenter asked of Palestinian affairs expert Dr. Mordechai Nissan of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem.
The Palestinians will continue to engage in an international diplomatic campaign to disparage Israel, accuse Israel of blocking peace initiatives and not being generous and forthcoming toward the possibility of renewing dialogue in the peace track. The Palestinians are strong in the world, even though it's a little bit of a misreading of the political map, because strong diplomatically is not only measured by public meetings with presidents of countries or prime ministers of countries, and not only measured by diplomatic initiatives at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, or even resolutions which are proposed and maybe even accepted by the United Nations Security Council. Because when you peel away the front of those events, you have to ask yourself what actually happened, what actually is the gain that the Palestinians have achieved. So it could be an exercise in part in self-delusion on the part of the Palestinians that they're moving forward diplomatically, but on the ground itself, there really is no concrete political gain. I'm not saying that that will continue. There may be a concrete political gain from their diplomatic efforts. There may be some kind of plan of sanctions imposed upon Israel by European countries. We have to wait and see. But in and of itself, the Palestinians have not been willing to go the extra mile and really try and resolve the conflict with Israel. And that means to recognize Israel as a legitimate Jewish state in Israel's, Jewish people's, historic homeland. Without being able to say that, there is no opening for authentic peace dialogue.
Would things have been any different had Isaac Herzog been elected Prime Minister?
Herzog would have felt obligated, had he been elected, to take some political initiative, because that was a major theme in his electoral campaign. He might have offered certain gestures on the ground regarding tax monies and maybe regarding security-related issues, freedom of movement and the like. But those gestures wouldn't have touched the core of what the Palestinians believe to be the conflict, meaning Israeli withdrawal, dismantlement of settlements, recognition of East Jerusalem as a Palestinian capital and the like. Would he have gone that far? We don't know. Would he have wanted to go that far? Certainly had a certain willingness, a rhetorical openness to go that far. Would he have been able and wanted to do that? We don't know. But as it turns out, therefore, Herzog is not the political power in the political equation now. And that's really the end of the Palestinians' hopes, which were uttered very openly, that he would be elected and Labor would be in power. So they've suffered a disappointment. And they believe that Netanyahu blocks their political future. But the truth of the matter is, it is Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas himself, and his political constituency, Fatah, PLO, etc., which have been unwilling to say what obviously has to be said, which is that he recognizes the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state. So long as he doesn't do that, it seems to me, Benjamin Netanyahu will not show any willingness to meet him halfway.
Can any Palestinian leader do that and really expect to live?
That requires a transformation in their national education to redefine who the Jewish people are, what the state of Israel signifies in this land. They have not at all approached that point on their political trajectory. Can they do it? They would need a leader of great stature. They would need to create a certain openness, spiritual openness, political openness towards the Jewish people, which they have not demonstrated. On the other hand, we should always point out and not forget that in daily life, so to speak, between Israelis and Palestinians, Israelis and Arabs, there is nonetheless a resonance of coexistence despite the blockage on the formal political path.
The animosity between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu is very well known. Will the Palestinians be able to make capital gain from that animosity, be able to move inside that wedge that's developed between the White House and the Prime Minister's office?
The Palestinians enjoy a great opportunity with the President in the White House. It's no secret, and it's not partisan to read the political map as such that Obama is sympathetic to the Palestinians and that he is uncomfortable with Israel's political positions represented by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But the Palestinians' hopes there also have to take into account the institutional structure of American politics, i.e. the role of the Congress. And we saw with the Congress inviting Netanyahu to speak there and the conflicts and tensions that exist, not regarding Israel, that exist in any case between the Congress and the President, such that the President does not enjoy 100% free will to conduct foreign policy in the Israeli-Palestinian imbroglio. He can't do that because he will pay a price with the Congress, which, Republican-led, is sympathetic to Israel. And so you cannot disconnect the domestic political situation in Washington from the Israeli-Palestinian topic.
Returning now to IBA's Eli Wogelenter, who asked the Times of Israel editor David Horovitz how the animosity between Netanyahu and Obama will impact relations between the two countries.
I think there's real room for concern. Here's one way that the United States and the international community could have reacted. They could have said to themselves, maybe Netanyahu's onto something here. Maybe a lot of people in Israel are wary about relinquishing territory in this unforgiving Middle East. Maybe we should take them seriously. Maybe we should internalize that Israel's only 9 miles wide. Maybe we should remember that comment he made about Israel. Oh, Israeli Arabs have a vote. What, 1/5 of the Israelis are Arabs and they have a vote? And they actually did pretty well in these elections without necessarily by any means approving Netanyahu's tactical comments and so on. In other words, it could have been that the international community had a little bit of respect for the Israeli voter rather than representing this election as some kind of fear-mongering, superficial Netanyahu fooled the electorate win, and said to themselves, maybe we should rethink a little bit. I don't see that happening. I see the reverse. I see an effort to present this victory as bordering on the illegitimate, kind of, well, this is how Netanyahu sort of stirred up the public and kind of misrepresented, like to denigrate his victory and to turn the screws even further. I think that's very unfortunate. I don't think one needs to be naive. I don't think one should expect a tremendously supportive international community. But maybe just take a second and internalize what happened here. Maybe those Israelis in their genuine democracy are not complete fools. Maybe they were worried that Herzog would not resist international pressure and that there would be pressure to relinquish territory. And look what happened in Gaza in 2005. And look what happened in southern Lebanon with the whole world assuring us that we would be fine in 2000. Well, actually, we weren't fine, and Hezbollah took over. It's not too late. That would be my little plea here. Maybe the international community don't have to love Netanyahu, don't have to agree to his tactics, but maybe there's some substance in that Israeli vote. Maybe the Israelis are not complete fools.
How do they react to the massive anyone but Bibi or dump Bibi movement that was spearheaded from outside this country that has now failed?
Look, you can argue, I think, that on both sides, all kinds of tools were used. Netanyahu has a newspaper that day after day promotes Netanyahu. Netanyahu can do no wrong for Yisrael Hayom, which happens to be the most read newspaper in this country and which is funded by an ally of Netanyahu. I don't think either side can really complain. I think they might ask themselves whose tactics worked. Did Yisrael Hayom help Netanyahu? I rather think it did. Did V15, V15, did it help Isaac Herzog? Not convinced. Not convinced that it brought out masses of anti-Netanyahu voters, not convinced that, in fact, it didn't have the opposite effect and enable Netanyahu to claim the whole world and its wife, which is what Yuval Steinitz said soon after the the results. The whole world and its wife was against Netanyahu, and it created a bit of a siege mentality. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if it actually, if both aspects of outside intervention wound up helping Netanyahu.
What is the Israeli electorate telling the world by their vote?
Look, some of the Israeli electorate is telling the world some of the things that I said. You know, that ultimately we didn't trust Isaac Herzog, or we weren't sufficiently inspired by Isaac Herzog. And although we're not particular admirers of, enamored with Netanyahu, some of us are, some of us aren't. Ultimately, you know, every poll, I hate to cite them, but every poll said we prefer Netanyahu to anybody else as prime minister. That was one poll that apparently was borne out. That's a poll that Netanyahu took very seriously, that's for sure. You know, they want me as prime minister. Well, you better vote for Likud. So, you know, did they trust Herzog? Were they inspired by Herzog's approach? Didn't do too badly, but, you know, failed by comparison to Netanyahu. So there's some of that. I would add in, though, and it's something that I wrote yesterday, I hope Netanyahu internalizes, right, that the consensual sense in Israel is shock, right? This result was not the result that Israelis expected. It's not a million miles away, but the Likud did better than most people expected. On the one side, there's shock and delight, the people who support Netanyahu. On the other side, there's shock and horror. There's despair that there won't be at least positive signals to the Palestinians, and that there will likely be more building, even in isolated settlements, that there won't be an effort to fix relations with this administration. There's concern about lots of issues, matched by the delight on the other side. Delight on one side, real concern, shock. And I hope, you know, I've told you what I would like the international community to do, which is just look a little deeper before you start with the pressure and the castigations. I hope Netanyahu can make the shift now from a fiercely partisan campaign. I mean, this is politics. He wanted to win those elections, right? From a fiercely partisan campaign where you said, on the right, if you want me, you better support me, because otherwise I'm not going to be your prime minister. Now he has to say, but now that I've won, I'm the prime minister. And he said it yesterday at the Kotel, at the Western Wall. I'm going to be the prime minister, you know, for all of the people of Israel, or words to that effect. You know, I would hope that he would internalize that. His coalition is not going to force him to. In fact, the only coalition he can realistically build is not going to force him to reach out to that substantial sector of the electorate that's really worried about where Israel is heading.
The United Nations Human Rights Council is slated to hear what's being termed the initial oral report this coming Monday from its Commission of Inquiry into IDF conduct during last summer's conflict with Gaza. Presentation of the complete report on alleged human rights violations and the Commission of War Crimes was also initially scheduled for March 23rd, but members of the tribunal asked that it be delayed until June to give them more time to assess already collected oral and written testimony. The Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem has staunchly refused to cooperate with the UNHRC probe, citing the international organization's long record of biased and anti-Israel activity. The government also protested the appointment of Canadian legal expert William Shabas to head the Gaza probe due to his public call prior to the conflict for Prime Minister Netanyahu to be prosecuted for war crimes at the International Criminal Court. Shabas resigned last month after Israel discovered he had once served as a paid consultant for the PLO. He was replaced by former New York Supreme Court Judge Mary McGowan Davis. Government officials in Jerusalem say that they are hopeful that the delay indicates that McGowan Davis and the remaining member of the commission, Doudou Diène of Senegal, are taking a more balanced approach to the material. And a federal court in Buenos Aires is now debating whether to reopen the case against Argentinian President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner following an appeal from Gerardo Policita, who was appointed state prosecutor to replace Alberto Nisman after his suspicious death in January. Last month, a lower court judge ruled that the investigation should be discontinued due to a lack of evidence that Kirchner allegedly acted to absolve Iran of involvement in the 1994 terrorist bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires that claimed the lives of 85 people. The latest developments come as allegations against Nisman are now filling the headlines, including a charge from Cabinet Chief Aníbal Fernández that Nisman embezzled state funds designated for the investigation of the terror attack that he instead used for taking prostitutes on lavish vacations. Nisman's defenders are dismissing those claims, insisting that they are part of an orchestrated campaign to delegitimize his accusations against the president. A Paris court has convicted French comedian Dieudonné Mabala of condoning terrorism and handed down a 2-month suspended prison sentence over a comment he made on social media. In the wake of the 3-day terror spree in the city last January, Dieudonné posted a statement on his Facebook page saying that he felt like Charlie Koulibaly, combining the I Am Charlie slogan that was used worldwide to express empathy for the 12 victims of the attack by 2 gunmen at the satirical Charlie Hebdo magazine with the name of the terrorist Amedy Coulibaly, who murdered a policewoman and 4 hostages at a kosher supermarket. The 48-year-old Dieudonné has previously been convicted 8 times on charges of anti-Semitism and has a core following among disaffected youth. He has increasingly been banned from mainstream media for his provocative performances, and many of his stage appearances have been canceled by local authorities. Well, here at home, and moving to a far more pleasant topic, this morning's partial solar eclipse. Local astronomy fans had their eyes on the skies at 11:56 this morning when the moon blocked around 6% of the sun. Elsewhere, there was a more powerful image, including in the Faroe Islands, where the skies darkened dramatically in the first solar eclipse in that region for 60 years. Thousands of delighted stargazers gathered in the capital of the North Atlantic Islands to view the spectacle. Other enthusiasts today welcomed the celestial show in Europe and Russia as the partial eclipse of the sun skimmed parts of North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. We're not slated to see another solar eclipse here in Israel until 2020. The IBA weather team tells us to expect those scattered showers in the north of the country to move a little closer to the center of the country tomorrow, where we're likely to see isolated light sprinkles of rain. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'll be back at this desk tomorrow to bring the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.